Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. David Wolf here. We are celebrating Earth Day, and as you picked up your kit and unloaded it, you probably recognize that there's 85% less of those little deli containers that we typically pack your stuff in for the mere purpose of being able to be more respectful to the earth. Even though these are reusable, washable, and microwavable, we thought it'd be best if we just reduced the amount of single-use type items that some folks throw it away, but reducing that to some extent. So as normal, I have unpacked my kit and I have put all my things in very small containers. If I was at home, I have a lot of little ceramic dishes that I would use to put all these items in so that they're reusable. And I have stepkids that are in their 20s. They've both taken a lot of ecological classes and they all pretty much know about managing resources here on the planet. So I have maintain that process. But tonight's event is really a little more time consuming than the ordinary because we're going to be going over some basic cooking principles and some knife skills and some of the fundamental techniques that we have in specific cooking processes. So I've taken the majority of the vegetables on one tray for knife cuts, which consists of the 2 peppers, the shiitake mushrooms, a carrot, onion. You may have a white onion, you could have a red onion, it depends. Either way, we're going to talk about that. You have some sweet basil, scallion, broccoli, and snow peas. I took all the items that are related to the vinaigrette and put them on one tray, and things that I need to be able to produce the cooking in either a wok or a skillet off to the side, along with my noodles. You could use Asian rice noodles, you could use spaghetti pasta. I just chose to use linguine this evening. So I'm going to start with the ginger and the garlic. Okay, that's going to be used in 2 applications, so I simply put them together and make those cuts one time, separating them by equal parts. So on the ginger, you're going to want to peel all that brown skin around the outside of the ginger just by using a paring knife and just kind of rolling around to be able to get that nice and clean on both of those pieces of ginger. On the garlic, there should be a brown end on those. I like to take that browned end off of the garlic because it could be bitter, and that is the root system that was there for that purpose. All these trims can go into the compost out in the yard if you're working in that capacity. If not, someday hopefully you'll have a compost container to work with. Starting with the garlic, I'm going to simply take the blade of the knife and press down on the garlic just to give it a little bit of surface, so I can have a little bit more continuity when I go to cut it. Then I'm going to have a claw-shaped hand with my thumb tucked back at all times, using these knuckles as my guide to make some nice thin slices of this garlic. And I'm going to do that with every one of those cloves. They don't really need to be smashed to be able to do this process. I just think it's a little safer because you have a flat surface. Once I've got that accomplished, the thin slices go into just basically a rough chop until they're a nice small dice or even a mince, and much smaller. Being conscientious of where your fingers are at all times when you're working with your knives, especially when you come back to the IK, these knives are super sharp. Ginger's done. I'm going to separate that again by equal parts, some for the vinaigrette and some for the cooking process. All right. You could use a bench scraper, which we use a lot of times in knife skills and dining. That allows us to be a little bit safer. So some's going to go over on the tray for the vinaigrette, and some's going to go over on the tray for the cooking of the noodle dish, all the vegetables. Ginger, I'm going to just do some nice slices. Again, flat side of the surface on the cutting board. Knuckles is my guide, thumbs tucked back. A claw-shaped hand, thin slices of that ginger. As I got those slices, I'm going to stack them up in small little decks. And those little decks I'm going to cut into nice thin strips, very thin strips, thin as you can get them, so that you have an order to each of these little strips of ginger. And then we're going to turn them and cut them one more time into a nice small dice and then into a mince. So the ginger goes into the vinaigrette as well as into the cooking vessel, whether that is a wok that you may have at home, or it could be a nice size skillet that's going to hold all the vegetables once they are cut. So looking for a nice small dice. I took a lot of classes at the Greystone Culinary Institute of America. One of them is on Southeast Asian cuisine, and this is the recommended means in which to be able to cut that ginger and that garlic. Basically thin slices into strips, strips into a dice. So we're not putting too many ruptures to the cells in that process. Again, divide this in equal parts for the vinaigrette and for cooking in the vessel. Tonight I'm going to use a wok because I have them here in the IK and it's a lovely piece of equipment to work with. Next I'm going to move into the scallions that you have wrapped up in that towel. And the scallions, you're going to take the root end, and on that root end you're going to take a paring knife and use the tip of the paring knife and put some cuts into that. Let's say we cut that off at an angle. Then we have that root end of that scallion, and we're going to cut a few little strips into that all the way to the root, but not through the root. So we end up with this little brush type of appearance. We're going to put that into a little bit of ice water and push that off to the side. With the remainder of the scallion that we have, we're going to do a little bias cut, a little diagonal cut. So we're going to have our claw-shaped hand with our thumb tucked back and holding those vegetables tightly in a bundle, using our knuckle as our guide to make some bias cuts of those scallions so that they're nice and thin and kind of at an angle. We see a lot of those cuts in Asian cuisine look like that. All right. We have the zest from a lime and the juice from a lime, which we'll come to here in a moment. The zest, we have done this on many applications with OUAB in the kitchen, just taking off the bright green exterior of the lime. We don't want the white matter. You can use it if you like, but it's really bitter. And we just want to use the very bright color of that lime. We can simply split that in half and juice it. I usually put them both together in the same place because they're both going to go in there at the same time. All right, and that can go into the vinaigrette, or you can put it into the cooking vessel, whichever is most convenient for you to work with. I'm going to use it in the vinaigrette because I think it has a nice flavor for that. After I've done those small little choppy dicey type items, I'm going to wipe down my cutting board so I have a smooth surface and clean to work with, and I'll move into more of the vanity cuts that we're going to be using this evening. I'm going to start with this tray that has the majority of them on there, and I'm going to start with the carrot because this is a little bit more complicated. It's round, it wants to roll, so we're going to get a good grip on that. Claw-shaped hand, thumb tucked back, index or second digit in, and my thumb are off center of the middle of the carrot. Firm grip on it. I'm going to take a slice off of that carrot. So now I have a flat side to work with. I'm going to repeat that on all four sides of that carrot, and then I'm going to cut that carrot into thin panels. These thin panels are then going to get stacked, much like the ginger, and cut into strips. Even though we have the rounded parts of that carrot, we're still going to cut them all into nice thin strips. And that's going to happen. You could do that with both sides, both sections of the carrot. I cut that carrot into equal parts. The small tapered end of that carrot I had for a snack when I was setting up the station. We don't really need that entire carrot in there, but you certainly could use all of that carrot in this dish. But I think this is a good size for the carrot to go into the wok. So that is the cut for the carrot. We'll move on with the shiitake mushroom, which is a nice Asian variety mushroom. We have several of those. You can do them 2 by 2 or 1 by 1, whatever works for you. Knuckle is my guide. Using that blade of that knife against my knuckles, kind of having my digits pressing downward on the mushroom so that I have it in order so I can keep track of it and it sits still. Flat surface of the mushroom. If you've got a long stem on there, feel free to cut that stem off. Really doesn't have a lot of culinary value. It's kind of tough. So that could go into the compost as well, or you could use it for a vegetable stock later on with any trim that you might have from the preparations of this evening. So those are my cuts for the mushrooms. Again, those would, if I was at home, this would go into soup cups or little ramekins that I get that I use for a lot of various applications. Bell peppers, we have them in nice little panels. There's a skin side and then there's the inside. So I'm going to cut those into nice thin strips from the interior of the bell pepper to the exterior. Again, nice thin strips. These are called julienne cuts. Same way for the red bell and the green bell. And we're going to have the tip of the knife going to the toe of the knife, tip, toe, and clipping these into nice thin strips. If it's easier for you to manage by cutting the bell pepper in half, feel free to do so that you can manage the process a little bit easier. Just be conscientious of where your digits are at all times so that you can protect yourself and still be able to do typing and other behaviors that we have. The onion, if you have a red onion or you have a white onion, I typically take out the center and use the center at another time. So all I need is these nice thin julienne strips. If I have a white onion, simply split it in half, take out the core or that section. I'm going to split that in 2 parts so I have better control over it. Claw-shaped hand, thumb tuck back, nice thin strips of onion as we work through that. You could certainly use all of the red onion or the white onion and use the core, but I would cut them separately just so you have a little bit more discipline and a little bit more order in the way that these strips come off. So if I have the core in there, I'm going to have big thick pieces of the core along with these nice thin strips of these julienne cuts of red onion or white onion, whichever of the 2 varieties are in your kit. Manage it, be conscientious of where your digits are as you cut through that. Broccoli, you might have some stems on the broccoli. If you do, simply take the paring knife that you have and manage those stems, take them off and use them for another application. So I have little pieces of broccoli, little buds without the stems just because they're going to work more aesthetically. Snow peas, we don't really have to cut these, but I think they're going to have a little better look. Take them in a small stack, and I'm going to put just a few cuts on them at a bit of an angle so that they're a little bit more orderly when it comes to tossing the noodle salad together at the end. Again, short little stacks. A lot of folks will go to the effort of trimming them, taking off this one end that has a little string, and pulling that string off. That to me is a lot of extra work. I think that's good fiber, insoluble fiber, good for us. So I don't bother taking it off. But if I was going to be doing a culinary competition, I absolutely would take those off. So it's really your preference how you want to go about doing that, your decision. I just think all the fiber we can put into our bodies is the best thing for us. So those are the cuts with the exception of the sweet basil. Hopefully your basil made it through the travel and everything. This was a very fine, very delicate basil, and I'm sorry if the basil does not work out. If not, you could use spinach or something else, but I think the flavor of the basil at the end works out well. So what I've done is I've taken the basil and taken the leaves and put them into a nice little stack, and taken that stack and just rolling up that stack into a nice little bundle, and then the claw-shaped hand, thumb tuck back, and to cut those pieces of basil into nice thin strips. That's what we call the chiffonade, Chifffonade. That is the chiffonade cut you'll see in some recipes, specifically referring to French cuisine, almost always used at the end of the cooking process. So those are all the cuts we need to do this evening. Next, I'm going to take a moment to be able to just to toast off the black and the white sesame seeds and the peanuts. If you don't eat peanuts, you can omit those and put them somewhere out of the house so that they don't have any issues with you or anyone in the family. Preheat that little skillet just enough to be able to get these items toasted. That's all we really want to do here with that. Now I'm going to have this water is now at a little bit of a simmer. I lightly salted it before we got started, and I'm going to start blanching some of the items that need to be blanched. That's going to be the snow peas, the broccoli, and the carrots. The carrots are the most dense, so they're going to take longer. So once that water comes to a slow simmer, I'm going to simply drop in those carrots and let them start to blanch. Follow up behind that with the broccoli and then the snow peas. I'm going to manage that so I can use that same water for all 3 vegetables to be able to reduce the number of steps that I need to take. Sesame seeds are going to go in first. That hot skillet doesn't need any oil. We're just going to shake them around, move them around a little bit to get a little color on the white ones. Hard to tell on the dark ones. You just can't see it. until you get that nice smell of toasted sesame seeds. And it's worth the trouble because it really lifts the flavor. Again, if you eat peanuts, put the peanuts in there as well, and I'll let both of those toast up to a nice, good aromatic, just enough to be able to give them some color. All right? That's happening. The carrots are moving along gently. You see the water moving the carrots along, and that's all good. I see a little bit of color showing up on the peanut, which is really going to be where you're going to recognize the color. Remember, there's a little bit of extra heat. It's going to remain behind, carry over in that skillet. So as soon as I start to see a little bit of beige on the peanut, I'm going to pull it off the fire, just so that I can allow that to cool down without burning. Then I'm going to put my wok on the stove top, because that's what I have here in the IK. You can get these at Williams-Sonoma. It's a round wok. Some of them have flat surfaces on them. These are really quite nice to work with. It's well worth the investment. Now that I've got a little bit of a boil going with the carrots, I'm going to add in the broccoli. Only takes a few seconds for the broccoli and just a few seconds for the snow peas. So it's going to allow those to immerse in there. Right after that, I'm going to put in the snow peas. So I got those three vegetables, carrots, broccoli, snow pea, in that water to be able to start the cooking process. My wok is on a medium-low heat. Allow that to get hot. And we're going to do what we call the blanch process, or the blanch and shock process. This is a very important step in a lot of cooking techniques because it allows us to stop the cooking of the vegetables and they don't cook any further, so we can have that nice crisp crunch. So really all I want to do is put a little color on the vegetable, and I'm going to put them in a little strainer, and the basket is going to go into a bath of ice water. All right, so that's the process on blanching and shocking. So what we've done is the first step is blanching the vegetables so that they're just al dente, which means they're still to the bite, which means they still got a little bit of crispness left to them. And I'm going to save that water. I'm going to cook our noodles in that water right behind it. So I have a little bath of ice over here that I'm just going to allow those vegetables to rest in so that they shock. That ice water is going to stop the cooking process almost immediately. And I'm going to let it drain off just briefly. And I'm going to, after it drains off, I'm going to put those vegetables on a paper towel so that I can get all that water off of there. There's a couple ice cubes in there. Get those out of the way. Paper towels, my friends, so that I can catch all of that water. Okay? That's that process. Really quite simple. Now that I have the wok getting nice and hot, I'm going to start with my mise en place. And on that, I have the stuff that I need to be able to cook with. And to cook with, I have a combination of sesame oil and vegetable oil. And I'm going to allow that to get nice and hot. And I'm going to start with the onion. I'll let those onions cook nice and gently. The thing about cooking with a wok, or even in the skillet, you want to keep things moving all the time. Those are working. Water's back to a boil. I'm going to put in my noodles and allow those to cook. Cooking those to an al dente where they're to the bite, so that there's still a nice clean line in the middle of the pasta that shows that they're still semi-soft. So you saw that wok was nice and hot. As soon as we put product into it, it slows down the heat, and it's now softening up those onions. We want those onions to almost caramelize. Caramelize just means we're bringing out the natural sugars in the product and allowing them to pick up some beautiful color from that cooking process. While that pasta is cooking, I'm going to keep an eye on it. I have a pair of tongs handy so that I can keep those noodles moving around in that boiling water so that they cook, again, just to the bite, the al dente process of cooking those vegetables. Having all the stuff in order like we normally do for OUAB in the kitchen is imperative for the ability to be able to cook things safely. After those onions get a little color, I'm going to put in the shiitake mushroom, and we're going to let those sweat a bit. Sometimes when I put in mushrooms, they tend to absorb any type of liquid that might be in the cooking vessel, whether it be a large skillet or a wok. And so a lot of times I'll put a small measure of liquid. Tonight I'm going to use a splash of mirin to be able to get that process started. Allow that to cook and evaporate. While that's working, I'm going to come back, take a look at my noodles and make sure that they're moving along and they're not going to stick together. It's important to move those along so that they don't get stuck together. As soon as that evaporates and dries out, I'm going to go in with the ginger and let that sweat briefly, and the garlic. I don't like to put it in too early. I want to be able to maintain this delicate flavor. As those start to get a nice aromatic, I'm going to put in the 2 mixed peppers, the julienne red bell and the julienne green bell pepper. Allow those to get nice and soft. You have salt and pepper. I would never use all of it we gave you. I would use whatever's going to work for you and your folks at home. Too much is not going to be healthy. Too much of that salt is not good for our arteries, blood pressure, and many, many other things about our anatomy do not belong with salt. Salt does not belong with that stuff. So be conscientious of how much salt you're using. No matter what age you are, it matters. So I have these vegetables now in a good position. They are soft, tender, and I'm simply going to turn off the heat, and I'm going to place those vegetables on a lined tray or just any tray you have at the house. I'm going to allow those to cool down a little bit. So we have the broccoli, the carrots, and the snow peas all draining off nicely, absorbing water on a paper towel. We have these sauteed vegetables. This is a cool noodle salad. It can be served warm, no problem. But tonight I have it designed to be able to cook, to be used in a cool, semi-warm state. Cooking the noodles, they're still not done yet. They're starting to become nice and limp, and that's okay. We want them to be al dente, which means there's going to be a little bit of raw in the dead center of the pasta. But I don't want them too overcooked, and I don't want them undercooked. That still needs a little bit more time. So I'm going to use a whisk tonight in a stainless steel bowl to be able to make my vinaigrette, all right? Because a lot of us don't have a blender. So I'm going to use a bowl, and I'm going to start with the liquid ingredients. The soy sauce, the lime juice, and the lime zest are going to go into the mixture. Everything's going to go in there with the exception of the oil, the sesame oil. The honey is going to be an emulsifier to help suspend it together through the whisking process so that those two properties stay together. The garlic measure that we separated out and the ginger measure that we separated out in equal parts, and then the mirin, the rice wine vinegar. So all that leaves me with is the sesame oil. Before I start the whisking process, I'm going to take a look at this pasta and see how well along it's going. It looks pretty darn close. I'm going to take a quick look at it. It looks good to me. Lay it on the tray. I'm going to just take the tip of the tongs and take a look at the inside. You'll not be able to see this at home on this monitor or on this video, but there's a nice white center in that pasta. That's a good spot for that to come off the fire. Take it off the heat, turn off your fire, and drain that into a strainer. We're going to allow those noodles to just simply air dry just a bit. I don't want to shock them because I want some of those starches to stay on there. All right. Good. Now that I have that done, I'm going to use a whisk, and I'm simply going to whisk all of these ingredients together and slowly stream in the sesame oil. If you have a blender at home, it's going to make a very nice emulsion. which is going to be a nice creamy dark brown vinaigrette that can be used for a lot of uses later. In another time, you could use it on fish. Certainly you can use it on many applications. But I think if it's homogenized and it's blended together nicely, it's going to be a really pleasant texture on your palate. So if you haven't got a blender, I would suggest you go out and buy one as soon as you're able, because it's very resourceful for a lot of cooking techniques that we have in the industry and what you have at home. A lot of our OUAB recipes, whether for kits, we've used blenders at least 4 or 5 times throughout the semester, and I think that they can come in very handy for us to work with. I'm going to put in my scallions into this mixture, and I'm going to put in my chiffonade of sweet basil, all in the vinaigrette. So there we have that. Now I'm going to use a little bit of vinaigrette on the noodles just to be able to keep them from sticking together. As you know, when we cook noodles, they typically will stick together because the starch comes out of the noodle. We want to keep those nice and loose. You could reserve some of the sesame oil that we have from the mix for the wok cooking and use that to oil the noodles. Now I'm going to use the wok as a mixing bowl this evening just to be able to put everything together because we already have it. So I'm going to start with the noodles in the wok. I'm going to start to put in the various vegetables, all the blanched and shocked vegetables that we had, which include the carrot, snow peas, and the broccoli. Go right behind it with the sauteed vegetables, the caramelized red onion, the julienne cuts of red and green bell pepper, and the beautiful shiitake mushrooms, all there together. And I'm going to use those tongs again as kind of to toss everything together very nicely. I have the flavor from the sweet basil, flavor of the scallions, all gently worked into the vinaigrette. I'm going to add a little more vinaigrette to this so that it has a wonderful flavor. Trying to get all that basil in the vinaigrette and the scallions. We salted and peppered already, so I don't think we need to do any more on that at this point. At this measure, you could put in some of the toasted sesame seeds and peanuts if you like. But at this point, we're pretty much done with this cool noodle salad, which tonight's being served a bit warm. And I'm going to put it all in a bowl, kind of a family style bowl preparation for this. So just put it all in the center, and all those vegetables are going to show up around the top. It's an absolutely lovely dish. I don't want to lose any of those vegetables. Being resourceful with all these vegetables is wonderful. It's part of our civic duty, not just on Earth Day, but pretty much every day. So I think that's important that we manage that process. So you could add a little more vinaigrette if you wanted to, and you can put in the remainder of the toasted sesame seeds and peanuts on top of the dish. And then I have left behind, I have that nice little scallion that we put into nice little scallion brushes. Put that in the center. And I had some cilantro here in the instructional kitchen. I think it's really quite nice to go with this dish. Cilantro and mint really makes a nice difference on this dish. So that is our OUAB in the kitchen on Earth Day, using all vegetables, no meat product, keeping it real for us in the industry. So I'm going to put this maybe in the light a little bit more so our director can get a little better shot at this nice cool noodle salad. He'll bring it in a little bit closer. And again, thank you very much for joining us for OUAB in the Kitchen, Earth Day 2021. Thank you very much. Have a great evening, good weekend, and enjoy finals week.